Hello Apes, and welcome to the Chapter 3 screencast series, and we're going to talk about evolution, biodiversity, and population ecology in this chapter. Okay, so some things, again, this is going to be a little bit of a review of what we covered in biology in our ecology unit, and it's also going to go into a little bit more depth so that we can get a better feel for this. So we're going to look at natural selection a little bit more than we discussed in biology. We're going to then take a look at how evolution is going to influence biodiversity. Biodiversity, remember, is the variety of life that we have, and organisms naturally change and adapt as the environment changes, so we're going to look at that. We're going to consider the reasons for species extinction and hopefully learn from those reasons so that we can prevent species extinction from happening in the future. We're going to look at ecological organization, the processes that help to keep everything in balance. We will consider population characteristics. And this population characteristics, not only will we be looking at populations for organisms and individual species, but it'll involve human population as well, because the humans impact the environment more than any species does on the planet. So we'll take into consideration population ecology, and then we'll just touch briefly on conserving biodiversity, because those organisms are our natural resources and they're important to our survival. Okay, so look at this beautiful, beautiful picture here. This is in Hawaii. So I'm transporting you to Hawaii there. Aren't you glad we're taking this virtual trip? And this is actually in the Hakalua forest, and you are looking at a bird that is an endangered species, and I can never pronounce the name of this bird. It is the Akiapola'au, and we're just going to call it the Aki for short. And it is, as you can see, a sparrow-sized bird, so that it's not really, really big. It's one of the many exquisite birds that have evolved on the Hawaiian Islands, and it exists only on these islands. It does not exist anywhere else in the world. So half of Hawaii's native bird species, there's about 70 to 140 of these birds, have gone extinct in recent times. And the percentage of species that are teetering on the brink of extinction today is higher than anywhere else in the world. So this bird, this aki, is a type of bird known as a honey creeper. That's what the bird is. And this is a species that actually diverged. It went from one species to another, and they actually, as they evolved in different colors, different sizes, and body shapes, and that happened because of their feeding behaviors, their mating preferences, and their diets and bill shapes. So this is what helped with the change. If you notice the bill on this species, it's kind of long, and some of these bills became short and even straighter. This one looks kind of hooked, like you see here. And then this allowed birds, by changing, to obtain insects from leaf surfaces. It was a little bit easier, where this could actually pick more at fruits and things. The bills also became long and down curved, enabling the birds to probe, as I said, into fruits and things, but also into flowers. As you look at this could really get into flowers and be able to get some nectar from those flowers. And even some of the birds had a straight lower half of its bill so that it would be able to peck kind of like a woodpecker in dead twigs and branches in order to be able to get insects like beetles and grubs and things out of that. So what we're seeing is that in today's native Hawaii, the forests like this are under siege. And the reason why they are is because about 100 years ago or so, when Polynesian settlers started to colonize the islands, they started to cut down the trees, as well as they brought in non-native animals that started to take over and compete for those resources. So what happened was this wound up bringing in disease, and it started to cause the numbers of these birds to go down. So this is our central case study, and the central case study is going to be about these birds, so that we're going to see this throughout the chapter. Please make sure that you're reading the central case study, and I've already highlighted a few key points from it, but it's on page 48 and it continues to page 49, and it shows you some pictures on there of some of the different species that we're going to see. We have seen, as I said, half the native bird species have gone extinct because of species like pigs and cattle and rats and cats that have literally destroyed the habitats and killed the eggs of the young. They've also brought something called avian malaria. We know what malaria is in Africa. Well, there's a bird type of malaria that has killed the native birds at lower elevations. So when we see this honeykeeper, this Ikea, they exist higher up within the mountains. They've moved up and you no longer see them in the lower regions because of that. So let's talk about different species. Okay, so that's your case study for this chapter. And that's your current topic and one of the things that you might maybe see on the free response questions on your exam in May. So let's take a look at this, and we're going to talk about species. And you're familiar with these terms, so once again I'm going to go over these relatively quickly and just read what we have here because you've covered these before in biology. So when we think about a species, it's a population or group of populations whose members share characteristics and they can breed with one another to produce fertile offspring. And the whole idea is fertile offspring because we want them to be able to reproduce. So we can have animal species that can mate and produce non-fertile offspring. And that would be like if you were to take a horse and a donkey together and it produces a mule. It's a non-fertile offspring. They cannot reproduce from that. So that's an example. So in a species, they have to be able to produce fertile offspring. So a population would be a group of individuals of that species that live in the same area. And of course, the definition for evolution, to familiarize yourself, is that it's a change over time. And we have a couple of different kinds of evolution. One is biological evolution, and this is change in populations of organisms over generations. So for example, the human population. We're losing our appendix. This has taken generations and generations to lose this because we no longer use our appendix. We think by studying birds, which have an appendix, that it used to be used for helping to fight toxins. Now it just collects waste and can become infected, and it serves no purpose at all. And there are people today being born without an appendix because it's getting smaller and smaller through the years. And then there's genetic evolution. There's genetic changes that lead to changes in appearance and functioning or behavior over a period of time. And that means that this is within our genes. So there is actually a change in the gene, the chromosome, that passes that change on from parent offspring from one generation to the next. Genetic changes in evolution are a little bit more random, and they are directed more by natural selection. So we've all heard of natural selection, which is kind of like the survival of the fittest. And this is one of the things that Darwin had come up with and discussed as one of the ideas of what happens in nature. And he says that it is a process in which traits that enhance survival and reproduction are passed on more frequently to future generations than those that do not. So strong characteristics, they're the ones that are going to be passed on. So simply, okay, redheads. The gene for redhead is a recessive trait, and because it's a weak trait, it's actually getting weaned out of the gene pool. Less than 5% of the population are true redheads now. So we're losing that gene because of natural selection. So genetic makeup of future populations is changed because of that. Redheads and blue eyes tend to be what they consider the weaker traits. They're more susceptible to other things than people with red hair, red blonde hair or brown hair or black hair. All right, so here's that picture I was referencing with the different species that you can see, and there's our our honey creeper that we were talking about. Here's another bird called the nenye that kind of looks almost like a combination of a goose and a duck. Here's a really interesting silver sword plant that we can see, and look at this spider. It's called the happy face spider. I don't like spiders. I'm not crazy about them, but this is not too bad. He's not too ugly for a spider. So evolution is one of the best supported and most illuminating concepts in all of science. I know you've got the theory of evolution, evolving from apes, and we don't know too much about that yet. We still have some missing links that we haven't confirmed that. But the organism's ability to adapt and change to its environment, evolution, is something that does happen, and it is the foundation of modern biology. So we have to understand how environmental science, or how environmental elements, interdependencies, influence evolution. So in order to do that, environmental science helps us to understand how these species can change over time and how they adapt to their surroundings. And that is really crucial when we go to develop in an area to understand the ecology and what happens when we disrupt it. The prairies are a very good example of this, where we plowed under all the prairies before we realized the value of those prairies. We've got wonderfully rich soils, but it created the Dust Bowl. Storms wound up becoming greater intensity because there wasn't as much resistance with the prairies. We lost species. So we can see through history what happens when we didn't understand the ecology of these systems. The evolutionary processes influence our pesticide resistance, and that's something that we're going to talk about and consider, our agriculture, our medicine, and our health. So we're going to end here with this screencast, and we will continue with the idea of natural selection in Darwin in the next one.